People quite often ask when I show this and we run it, it's like, so does the user have to authenticate every time? Because that would kind of seem annoying. So let me just run the app one more time here. Nice. And it just bombs. Sorry, this VM has been acting up, so hopefully it will. Please do not now. Let me just try and close Visual Studio and open it up again. I'm going to authenticate again, and there's the thing. And if I run this one more time, I'm going to go through the same process. So that's annoying to ask the user to authenticate every single time, right? So there's a way to get around that. So if we come back to the application here, let's go back to the home controller, and then go down to the authorize method. You can see that after I've completed the authorization, I get this access token. Okay. And I also get a thing called a refresh token, which isn't exposed. It used to be exposed through the auth result object, right? But it's no longer exposed through the auth result object. So if you actually just put a breakpoint here, and then hit F5. And then go through this process one more time. When I go to the auth context and expand this, you can see, let's see it, if we go down here. So there's the auth context. In the auth context, there's an object called the token cache. Okay, so if we go to the token cache, we can see that the token cache currently contains one item, right? And if I go to the non-public members here, and then go into this dictionary, we'll see there's one item in the dictionary, and its key contains the client ID, the authority, which is basically the tenant identifier, and the displayable ID, which is the thing that identifies this user, me, and then also the resource that I'm able to access, graph.microsoft.com. And inside of here, we also have the refresh token. Okay. So that's being cached. The authentication context has this token cache, but the out-of-the-box default token cache is an in-memory cache. So as soon as the application stops, the cache is cleared, and when I start up the application again, all that cache token information is gone, right? But what we can do, and what I used to do before when the refresh token was exposed, you can see that I've actually gone into the non-public members, so this isn't something I can query in the API without using reflection. I would just grab the refresh token, write it to some kind of persistent storage, and then when the app started up, I'd say, okay, I'll go query that storage. Is there a refresh token there? If there is, then I would make a call to get the access token using the refresh token. And if you do that, you don't have to present the user with the login dialog. Okay? But since the refresh token is no longer exposed by the API, I have to use a different technique. And what that is to create a custom token cache that will cache this information being stored here in memory currently to some kind of persistent storage. And what I'm going to use is a file on disk. Okay? And then when the app starts up and I create the authentication context, I say use this cache class, use this cache object to do the caching. That will then read it from disk, and then if I start up the app again, when it first starts up, it'll go read that information from disk. I'll have the cache credential information, and I can use that to immediately authenticate with Azure AD as opposed to going through the process we saw earlier. Okay? So this way, I don't force my user to go through the login process every single time. So the first step in this is to create the file cache. So I think I called the class file cache, yep. All right, so I'll come back to my project here. I don't think it's that big. I'll right click, I'll say add class, and we'll call this class file cache, and click add. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, this class is going to inherit from the base token cache class that's part of the ADAL library, and just implement the pieces we need to be able to cache to a file as opposed to memory. Okay, so you can see I'm inheriting from token cache. That comes from the ADAL library. And here's the constructor. So in the constructor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the file path. If that file exists, I'm just going to basically read the contents of the file and deserialize. So deserialize is a method on the base token cache class that will initialize the internals of that type. Okay? So when I first construct the file cache object, it will go and see if the cache is there. If it is, it'll read that information and populate the internals of the cache. I can clear the cache. Let me just resolve this type name here. And basically all I'm going to do is just clear the, delete the file. And then there's before access and after access. So before access, basically if I'm going to go access the cache, it's just going to go and refresh the internals to make sure that in case the file's been updated by some other application or some other instance of the application, that I have the most recent information. And then after access is if the internal state of the cache has changed, then it will persist that out to the disk. Okay, so it's really very, very simple class to implement here to be able to implement the cache. And then all we need to do is we need to modify the code back in the home controller that goes through the authentication process to see is there cache credentials, and if there is, then silently authenticate with Azure AD. If there isn't, then go through the full authentication process that we saw earlier. Okay? So I'm just going to implement that code here. It looks like this. Need this guy too. So let me just get rid of all of this stuff here. All right, so the first thing I've done is I've just centralized some of this stuff up at the top. So the client ID and client secret, I was getting those in each method before, because I wanted to be able to show you everything on one screen. Now those are fields within the type here. I've also put the authority in there as well. It's the same as before. And then also the cache, the file for the cache, right? So I'm going to go to My Documents. I'm going to have a folder in there called Graph Demo, and there's going to be a file in there called tokencache.dat. That's where the application is going to store the token information. Okay, this is all the same here. And now when I'm creating the authentication context, notice I'm passing in and saying create a new instance of the file cache type, and I pass in the path to the file cache. Okay? Here's where I'm querying the file cache to see is there cache credentials. So are there cache credentials for the specific authority, right? So that's this string here, or this URL here. And for this user, which is my user email, right? So if there's something in the cache for that authority, for that user, then I know I have cache credentials. And what I'll do is I'm going to then silently authenticate. So I'm going to create a client credential. This is the credentials of the app. I'm going to call the acquire token silent method, saying that I want to authenticate for the graph, and then pass in the app credentials. The ADAL library will take the user credentials it needs out of the cache automatically for me. I don't have to do that. So as long as that information exists in the cache, it will be used in this method call. Right? So it's authenticating for the user and the app, even though the code you see really makes it look like it's only really authenticating for the app. Okay? If there isn't anything in the cache, then I go through the same process I did before, where I redirect, I have the user enter their credential information, and then come back and go through the authorized process. Yes?
No, I just noticed that you're writing your cache. How are you getting an IIS? Would you be able to do what you're doing with where the cache path is? Where it's writing like into the user space usually.
Oh yeah, you can. So yeah, I mean, I'm just doing this as an example.
Okay.
So if I was doing this in production, I wouldn't use a file on disk, right? I would use, I could use Azure Key Vault. I could use Azure Storage.
Okay.
Yeah, I could. I mean, there's a bunch of different places. I wanted the simplest possible example for the demo.
Very well.
Okay, so let's just make sure that I don't currently have that file on disk. So I'll go to My Documents. I'll go to Graph Demo. That folder is empty. Okay. So come back to here. We'll hit F5. Click the button. The cache information wasn't there, so I'm going through the full login process. We see the results, the same results we had earlier. I'm going to stop the application. I'm going to run one more. Well, first off, let's go here. We can see now there is a file there. I'll hit F5 again. I'll click the button. And now we silently authenticate and we get the file information. Okay? Now, the code I have in the demo, it doesn't have any error trapping in here. At some point, the refresh token will expire, right? So at some point, this will throw an exception saying you don't have a valid refresh token. You have to re-authenticate, right? So I should have a try catch in there to check for an ADAL exception to handle that scenario. But it's a demo, so try catches aren't allowed in actual demos, only in production code. So. Okay, so that's an MVC application that is using both user and app authentication to be able to query information for whatever user authenticates during the authentication process, right? And of course, right now it's kind of hard-coded to only work for me. I would change this code around to support multiple users, right? Again, it's this is fine for the demo, but for production, you need to be a little bit more robust in the coding here. So the other type of authentication is app-only authentication, and this is like I want to write a web service again. I want something headless that I can use to work with multiple users. Okay, so let's go through the process of registering the app. This time I'm going to use the Azure portal to register the app for two reasons. One, I want to show you how to register an app using the Azure Management Portal, and two, the demo I have currently only works with apps registered through the Azure Management Portal or using the V1 authentication. I tried doing it through the V2 authentication. I was getting a forbidden error coming back, and I'm not sure if it's just I'm not requesting the permissions correctly that I need, or if it's a restriction around how V2 works. Initially, when the Microsoft Graph or the Office 365 APIs were coming online, you could only do app-only authentication using the client ID, and instead of the client secret password, you would have to use a certificate. Okay? Microsoft changed that some time ago. I can't remember exactly how long ago, where you can do that, client ID plus certificate, or you can use client ID and client secret. It's quite possible that the V2 authentication is client ID plus secret, plus certificate. Again, I just haven't had time to fully explore that. So that's another reason why I'm using the Azure Management Portal. All right, so let's come back to create an app. My organization is developing. What's the name of the app? So this is cttdnug.demo02. It's asking me, am I creating a web application or a web API or a native client application? Even though I'm creating a console application, obviously I'm saying I'm going to use a web application. What's the sign-on URL? Because I'm using a console app, I won't have a sign-on URL, but I will be accessing my tenant. I'm just going to put in a URL to SharePoint to start out with. It'll work. So I'm just going to grab my root SharePoint online URL here. Come back to here. And what's the app ID? The app ID has to be a unique string. So I just put in my SharePoint tenant ID and then the name of the app. So it's cttdnug.demo02. Okay, so, oh, did it say couldn't create it? Oh, come on, what's going on here? Hopefully that was just, it was just trying to troll me. Okay, application my company owns.
It's there.
Okay, demo 02. So I'll click on that and then I'll click configure. So there's the name of the app, the sign-on URL, which I showed you earlier. There's the client ID, so I'm going to copy that. So let's come back over here and start up a new instance of Visual Studio. And then let's create a new console application, right? So I'm creating a console app. I mean, you can create whatever kind of app you want. Like, for example, if I was doing an Azure web job, this is how I'd start out. cttdnug demo 02. And I just grab this guy here. So I could put this in the app config. I'm just going to put it right into code here. Just for simplicity's sake. So coming back to here, I'm going to copy the client ID. And then come back over to my app and paste that in. And then come back here. Here's where I create the client secret or the password. So this can last for 1 year or 2 years. I'll create a 1-year one. It doesn't actually create till I save. So I'm just going to leave that for now. And then here I'm building an app that's going to be app-only authentication. So I'm not going to request delegated permissions. I'm going to request application permissions. Okay, so what can the app itself do? Oh, and I need to kind of trick it to put the UI isn't the greatest. I need to kind of go down here so it puts the options up instead of down. Oh, sorry, I didn't want Azure Active Directory. I wanted to do Microsoft Graph. So I'm going to click Add Application here and say I want to use the Microsoft Graph. And then I want application permissions on the Microsoft Graph. So I want to be able to read contacts. So read contacts in all mailboxes. So I'm going to select that one. And I also need to read directory information. Read directory data. Okay, so read information out of Active Directory. All right, so that's going to allow me to make the calls I need to be able to read my contacts out of my mailbox. And then I'm going to click Save here. And at this point, now I can get my client secret. So the ability to see the client secret and copy it will only be shown here. As soon as I refresh the page, then I won't be able to ever retrieve it again. So again, it's just important to copy it right there, and I'm going to paste it in here. Okay? So now I have the client ID and client secret in. To do an app-only authentication, that's all I really need. So let's come back over here and grab this code and come back to here. So again, I'm going to need the ADAL library. So I'm going to right-click, say Manage NuGet Packages, go online. I'm going to search for ADAL, A-D-A-L. I'm going to choose the Active Directory Authentication Library, click Install, click I accept, and close. And that'll allow me to resolve these type names here. Right, so I'm using the same authority. notice I'm using login.windows.net. That was the original login, so either one will work, login.microsoftonline.com or login.windows.net, followed by either common if you have a multi-tenant application, or your tenant ID if you have a single tenant application. I'm going to create the authority, I'm going to create a credential for the app, and then I'm going to call acquire token async. So I'm going to ask for permissions to access the Microsoft Graph using those client credentials. Right, so again, I'm asking for credentials for the app only. Once I have that, I have my access token, I can then go ahead and make the service call to get the contact information. So that guy looks like this. Okay, and this code is, the top part of the code is basically exactly the same as what we saw earlier. I'm going to create a new HTTP client object. I'm going to set the authentication token, or the bearer token. I'm going to say that I'm expecting JSON back. I'm in a console app. That's why I'm getting some errors here. I need to make two assembly references. So I'm going to say add reference, and I need system.net HTTP. That's for HTTP client. And I need system.web.extensions, and that is for the JavaScript serializer. System.web.extensions. Okay, and then hopefully now everything else will resolve. Did I add HTTP client? I did here. Let me just delete that. I wasn't paying attention. And let me, I created all these classes. Let me delete these as well. Okay, now let me again resolve these properly. Okay, there we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm in an app-only authentication. There is no me. So before, all of the examples we saw, the samples over here, used me. So Microsoft or V1, well, actually there's not a me in there, but with the messages, there was a me. For the event, you'll see me, which means whoever the authenticated user is, get the stuff for them. Well, here I'm in an app-only authentication. There is no authenticated user. The only thing is the app, right? So I can't use that same technique I saw before. So what I'm going to do is say, I want to get the contact information for this user, right? So it's the root, version number, users, the email address, or there's actually an ID, which is like a GUID for the user, and then what resource you want to access. In this case, I want to access their contacts, or I want to access my contacts out of my Exchange system. Okay. Excuse me. So if I come back over to here and go to my Outlook, you can see I currently have two contacts, Mark Rackley and Seb Matthews. Right? What I want to show is the display name, which are these names here. So coming back to this, I'm going to iterate through the JSON coming back, and I'm going to write out the display name of each of the items in the collection I get back. Okay. So at this point, I can go ahead and just run. It's going to get the token, it's going to resolve that, and there you can see the contact information. Okay. So again, if you look for examples on app-only authentication with Azure, with Office 365 APIs or Microsoft Graph, most of the examples will show you the client plus certificate, so client ID plus certificate. That still works if you want to go that way. The biggest problem is, for example, if you're creating an Azure web job, is where do you store the cert, right? If you're creating a web application or something like, or a console application, you can have that in your certificate store on your Windows box. But if you're putting it up in Azure, you can't easily do that. The only real place, sort of valid place I found to do that is in the Azure Key Vault. All right, so put the certificate up there in the Azure Key Vault, and then you can read that in your application. So you authenticate with the Azure Key Vault. That'll allow you. Then there's also permissions required. So when you configure the Azure Key Vault, you say that this app has access to these secrets or keys within the Key Vault. Let the app read the cert, recreate the cert in memory, and then you can actually go through the authentication process with that. So I don't have a demo that shows that, but that's something you can do as well. So if you see that, it works as well as using the application, or sorry, the client ID and client secret for the app. Okay. All right. So just one last thing, and actually Dave brought this up during the break. This kind of code here is pretty ugly, right? Like having to work with raw JSON, especially in managed code, is not that cool. I could use a library like JSON.NET, which makes it a little bit better, the Newtonsoft library. I could also create types in my application, and then use one of the other serializers available in .NET to deserialize the JSON into those types, but that's actually already done for you. So I don't know if there's libraries for other platforms, but there is a client library for .NET applications. So basically all they do is they get the metadata for the services, and they build types around that metadata and build methods that are Fluent API, that allows you to access stuff in a strongly typed way. So basically underlying the Fluent API, just building up the REST URLs to make these service calls. So, and in this case, I want to look for Microsoft.graph. So there's the Graph Client library. You notice below that there's also the core library. So the client library has a dependency on the core library. It's going to add both of those in. So I'll click Install. And I accept. And just want to make sure that it actually did add the references, and it did. Okay, and at this point, I'm going to have an issue with the version of the Newtonsoft JSON that's being used by the Microsoft Graph library, the SDK. So I have to resolve that. So I'll go back in and say manage NuGet packages, go to updates, and then just make sure I'm updating JSON.NET here. That will resolve that issue. And then I can just modify this make call to Microsoft Graph to use the SDK as opposed to just making a raw REST call like this. And that code looks like this. So the core object is the Graph Service Client, and the Graph Service Client takes an authentication provider as a parameter. We see the authentication provider is defined up here. I have a very simple one, so I already have code to go and get the access token. So within the authentication provider, all I'm going to do is say, when you make calls, add the bearer token as a header to the call. Okay? But I can actually have, I can have this code here that goes through the authentication process down in here. There's lots of different things you can do in here. Again, I wanted something as simple as possible. So I'm just using the pre-existing code I had to go through the authentication, the app-only authentication process. And all this really does is just attach the token to requests. Okay? So you can there's examples of other authentication providers that you can create and use on the internet. So then I'm going to go create a new Graph Service Client, passing in the authentication provider, and then here's the Fluent API, right? So I'm going to go to the client root, that's the Graph Service Client, and then I'm going to say for the user Rob Windsor, I want to make a GET request to get the contact information, right? And then now, when I get the contacts back, I have IntelliSense, right? So this library has been generated against the metadata for the service. The service metadata says when you make a GET request for the contact information, the shape of the JSON will be this. So it then builds types, strong types, to represent those properties and give you full IntelliSense and access them. So integers will be integers, dates will be dates, and so on. All right. So again, I want the display name, so I'm going to ask for that, and that comes back as a string. So I can go ahead and run this, and you can see we end up getting the same results. All right, so just to review, if you already have an Office 365 tenant, then you can do all the stuff that I showed you through the Azure Management Portal. Again, you're going to go to your Active Directory. So if I come back here, I'm going to go to my Active Directory. It's under the Applications tab. And again, if you just want to see the apps that you're working on, you just filter on apps my company owns. These are apps that you've created. We go through the app registration process. Once we've registered the app, then we can authenticate, or we can build applications that authenticate either with user and app. So I'm I'm delegating permissions to the user who's using that app to use a specific resource. In this case, it's the Microsoft Graph. Or we can do app-only authentication, where I want to have a web service, a web job, an Azure function, all different kinds of things you can build, right, to be able to make service calls on behalf of multiple users. If you do build a web application, so if you use the new registration portal, and you build a web application, and this actually could be what's causing my console app not to work properly. Remember I showed you that trust dialog? If you want to use app-only authentication, then when the trust dialog shows, a tenant admin has to say, yes, this app has these permissions. Because if you remember back here, right, let's go to this guy here, and take a look at my app permissions. Right, it's read contacts in all mailboxes, or read and write calendars in all mailboxes. Send mail as any user. Right, the app permissions are asking for permissions to do stuff as any user within the tenant. Right, so to have those kinds of rights, when the trust dialog shows, the only person who has those rights, who can grant the rights to the app, is a tenant admin. Right, and that's another thing that potentially is causing my console app not to work when I register it with the new app registration portal, is that I have no way through a console app to show the trust dialog. So the tenant admin hasn't granted the app rights, and that's quite possibly why I'm getting the forbidden message there. Okay, again, it's something I just have to research and to do a little bit more work on. Right, so hopefully that is a broad enough introduction to not only the Microsoft Graph and the APIs behind it, but the tools you need to work with it, and a little bit around the coding of the apps. So any final questions before we finish up? Yeah.
Rob, you mentioned that you would create like a web job for this, like using Graph and stuff. What would be an example of a web job that you would create? Like, what would you do with that web job per se? Would it be?
It could be like I could have a web job that's with doing event handling through webhooks.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yep.
I could have a web job that runs on a timer schedule. So for example, I want to go and check if there's any emails from a specific sender or any emails with high importance. Okay. I mean, there's just a myriad of things that you could do. Yeah.
Okay.
The JavaScript code that you showed during the break is in this application or not?
Oh yeah, it's part of the download. So that's actually, thank you for reminding me about that. Because of the issues with my VM, I forgot to mention this. All the code I've shown you, plus I have a couple of JavaScript examples. I haven't looked at the JavaScript stuff in a while. I want to flush that out a little bit more, but I've included them. You can go to my Twitter feed. So it's twitter.com/RobWindsor. And my most recent tweet has a link where you can download. There's a slide deck, but the slide deck isn't really, I mean, it just has some links in it. Really the important thing is the demo. So all the demos I showed you, plus 2 JavaScript demos. Again, I haven't really looked at these in a while, but I will. Let me just see if I can come back here quick. Let's go to Dropbox. So there is a JavaScript ADL library. So there's where I'm loading it there. So here's where I'm configuring the information like what's the tenant I'm going to talk to, what's the client ID of the app, what resource am I asking for. The credential cache is going to be in local storage for this application. Here's where I'm creating the authentication context based on that config information. I can check and see whether I'm authenticated or not. That's the code up here. And then down here is where I'm actually making the call. So there you can see I'm making the call to get the files out of the OneDrive. That was the example I used in the first example. Here's where I'm setting the accept header. I'm setting the bearer token for the authentication here. And then I'm using Ajax to just make that REST API call to go get the file information. Right. So the one thing I found problematic when I did this, and again I haven't revisited this code in a while, is that when this code ran, it did a full page post back, and the access token, an encoded version of the access token, was placed on the URL. So that's how it maintained the access token. So the whole full page postback thing was kind of very jarring, I found. I was doing it within the context of a SharePoint page, and it just didn't really work well for me. But I mean, if you want to consume the graph, and I'm not sure if that's changed since the last time I looked at this. This stuff changes so rapidly. Like every time I do this talk, I have to like prep it again because, there's a new registration website. It's over here as opposed to the old website, or the API has changed. For example, they used to expose the refresh token. Now they don't expose the refresh token. You used to have to do client ID insert to do app only. Now you can use client ID and secret. Excuse me. So, like I joked to my, that at some point I'm going to be doing this talk and they're going to change something as I'm doing the talk, so that when I go to access it, it's like it doesn't work anymore, right? I'm sure that there's devs back at Microsoft doing that. It's like they search for, okay, somebody's doing a talk between this time frame, so let's really troll them.
That's okay,
Right.
just wrong.
So that is something you have to be aware of, right? Especially when you're looking for knowledge base, right? So again, if I just go here, so Azure AD app only auth. So you'll find some stuff here. Let's see if I can find integrate Office Graph API and app only mode. We'll see if this talks about registering the application in. This one. Oh yeah, there it is, right? So now it's like generate the cert, because you're going to need a cert to do this. Well, that changed, right? It'll show you UIs that don't exist anymore. So because of just the nature of the rapid evolution, finding accurate current information is really, really difficult. A lot of the stuff, I've been recently working with Azure Key Vault. All of the stuff that I've been seeing is all, okay, start up Azure PowerShell and do all these PowerShell commands. There is a UI, but the UI is so new that there is no knowledge base around that, and there's hints in some of the posts that they might create a UI at some point. But if you just dig around in the new Azure portal, you can find it, right? So again, it's just really, really kind of difficult to make sure that the information you have is current and it's still accurate. If I searched on stuff for the refresh token, it would say, oh, just go to the auth contact and grab the refresh token, but it's not there anymore, right? So these are some of the things you have to be just aware of as you kind of do this stuff. And really anything in the Azure space is kind of the same thing, right? It's just very, very rapid evolution of the technologies there.
So you've been working in what they're calling the classic Azure management portal. Is this stuff exposed in the new portal.azure.com? Maybe not. Sometime, probably 10 minutes.
All right, I hate the new Azure Management Portal. The UI, I don't know. It just It doesn't gel with me.
It's kind of odd, isn't it? All the blades that just keep.
Yeah, so check out the new portal. Here it is, launch. Okay, so this is the new portal.
It's not the best experience sometimes, depending what you're doing.
Yeah, so for example, the key vault thing, right? So I just went to more services and scrolled this through the seemingly endless thing here until I finally found key vaults. And it's like, oh, there is a UI for this. Okay, so there must be Azure Active Directory. So we can click on that. And enterprise applications? Oh, hold on, app registrations. Oh, there we go. Why aren't they all there? That's interesting. Okay, CTT.
Are there things you created before the new resource manager?
I promise it'll work.
Well, you can see the two. I created two tonight, and there's only one of them there.
Okay.
So yeah, it's like, I don't know.
So I found some, and I really don't only use VMs in Azure, so pretty limited, but some things don't show up if you created them in the old, not in the new, or vice versa.
Oh, it could be because I created. Yeah, so I created the first registration using this portal. I didn't create it using the Azure portal. So maybe that's why it's not there.
Yeah, there's some funky stuff in some of that.
But it is there. So it's here, but not there.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's click add. Let's just see how this plays out. Enter the name of the application. So cttdmug.demo03. Application type is a web on the sign-on URL. Let me just go grab. Oh, go away. This guy here. Oh, I didn't have I must have had an app URL for that, didn't I? Okay, it doesn't really matter. I'll just go here and here. I'll just grab this guy. Back over here. Create. Okay. Settings, I'm assuming. Okay, that didn't work.
It's open.
Yeah, but okay, what properties?
Keys?
Object ID, application ID. So I'm assuming application ID is client ID. Homepage.
There's a keys under all access.
Oh, there is there?
I don't know. Maybe that's create more.
Select an API. Microsoft Graph. Okay, so this is where we select permissions. And permissions. So I read all files. Oh, this is app permissions though. How do I do? So yeah, you can do it. I don't know how to do it. I'm sure if I dug around this enough, eventually I would figure out, all the different things I'm going to do. I just always use the old portal.
Yeah. One thing you find in the new portal for stuff is that it's become a lot more granular and a lot more abstract. So there's a lot more moving parts, but you have far more control than you used to. So.
That's what I found.
Yeah, and there's some things you can only do in the new portal. But honestly, every time I have to go to the new portal, it's like, okay, I might as well just, budget an hour and a half to get something I can do in the old portal in 5 minutes, right? And of course, it's like everything else. Once you've done it a couple times,
Right.
then it becomes second nature and it's not a big deal. But it's just figuring out the first time and all these pop-ups and constantly scrolling right. It's just...
Yeah, those blade things.
Scrolling to the right is just
Is
bizarre.
that- Yeah. it's-
Yeah. So again, it
starts
just...
to get a little too much.
It just doesn't... It just...
That's why I bought a wider screen.
Yeah, we need the dial. It's good.
So this doesn't suit my taste. It's just, so I do everything I can in the old portal and only go to the new portal when I have to. Anything else?
All right.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.